The show, the show is an attempt to actually to live up to the original conversation I had with Luca. We were when he invited me to do this as a part of this year Biennale. We were trying to figure it out what would be the right thing to do. Well, not the right thing to do, what would be proper or interesting to do in relation to computation and the status of computation and digital today. So in a way, we went back and the first idea, the first concept that we talked about there pretty much became what the exhibition became. And the first thing was the name, the architectural beast, which is something that has been floating in my head for a long time, which is this kind of a mega monster or hydra that can take many shapes. So it's a speculation and a provocation on the relation between the individual and the collective, and understanding architecture is a collective. So the work of the designers they selected here represent different points of view and different ambitions. Some of them are much more committed to kind of a more recognizable form of architectural practice. Some of them are more speculative, but they all have a common ground to be exploring different agencies of contaminations and corruption into the system. So that's one layer, and that's what the fixed images represents, the origin of some of these notions. So there is a dialogue going on, but it's less evident. It's more like a cacophony or an ecology or a jungle of different species. And the other layer, which is the thing using artificial intelligence, which is one of the most recent or more current technologies to come to the party of the digital and figure it out how that can produce new iterations and mutations and takes as a reference, as the parting point, the work of these individual architects, but also goes and grab from the world of images and keep still regenerating in a permanent state of non-stable and infinite mutations. Variations, and so there is this friction between the individual and the collective, and also a reflection, for good and for bad, of the idea of the consumption of image and the transition of that, and which is a byproduct of the digital, which we consume and translate to images. And this we can be critical about it. I'm not being happy camper about that this is per se good, but this is a reality and is very much part of our culture. So we wanted the show to have that. So in a way, it's a simple idea. It go back in many ways to these are two concepts and questions that have been floating around the digital, between the notion of authorship and the tools share, and how that create a collective authorship and individual authorship. We just try to put that in a more aggressive, almost non-recognizable way. So some of the outcomes, if you have to really look and pay attention very carefully to try to see the origins, but they keep evolving. And then the text start to become something else that also became part of it, how the machine and the artificial intelligence is reading these things and how the provocation is put out. So in a way, it tried to make it about what is 2019, but at the same time, it's a way to remind us that the ideas and the problems and the question remains in many ways the same. So, which has been also the same with the culture of architecture for centuries. So there's always something interesting that nothing is really new, but they keep reconfiguring and innovating, and it keep hopefully producing new possibilities and new results. Not new results, but at least more unpredictable results that you can still trace and recognize them, but they have a whole other series of qualities that they were not so easy to predict. We are in 2019, so more or less it has been 25 years, depends when you cut the line of what is being known of the eruption of digital or computational into architecture. And I think this has been a process we have many phases. I started working with it in 98, 99. And I think I was part of a second generation of people that were taught by the first generation, people like Greg Lynn and Jesse Rice and Nana Komemoto and others. And at the origin, I think there was a kind of a direct relation with the kind of a scientific approach to it. As the thing evolved, like any other technique evolution, it took different phases. And I think, as you mentioned, there are practices of architects to tend to focus more into a kind of a more algorithmic or parametric approach in which the process became a kind of a more orthodox way of working. And I think many of those people have done remarkable, fascinating work. It's a work that I admire and respect a lot. My take was, as we keep evolving with our own use of the work in the office, and also what I've been doing as a teacher, I have more of an interest, or what I will call contamination, or agents of contamination, or agents of corruption, in which we try to use the computer more as a way to liberate a whole series of new possibilities on the formal and the aesthetic approach to design. And in that sense, we are being way less rigid in how we did that. Over the years, we keep incorporating new softwares and new techniques, but the goal became more and more clear about to be driven by the aesthetic and the production of desire, the production of monstrosity or speciation. So it has been, for the lack of a better word, I've always been more obsessed with the problem of virtuosity and the idea to create a notion of monstrosity or almost counterintuitive approach. Like, of course, as anybody who's interested in form, I'm interested in beauty, but that was interesting to access to beauty through other mechanisms. So we always work in a much more fluid, free, almost like a jamming, like from music approach to it. So I don't know. I think we use a lot of techniques that many other people use. I think we combine them in our particular way. I always been interested in the notion of authorship and identity, or even style, which is a word that is not many people like. But I always been obsessed with this idea of signature, to reclaim a sense of individuality and humanism into the work that is a reflection of my own views of what design should be. As I say many times, I don't think this is better or worse. It's just the way I've always been interested in. So I'm very obsessed with technology and how we can use it, but I never wanted to be married or attached to only one way to think about it. And for sure, optimization or efficiency has never been the driving force of the work. It always has been more going, not for the unexpected, because I think we have a clear sense of what we want, but it has always been much more image-driven, with a clear idea what we want the things to look. Well, I always been very like the idea of a sponge. I mean, I always like the architect as a sponge. So you absorb a lot of other things. So I understand architecture and design as a cultural practice. So I like to allow myself to be contaminated by my own desires and obsessions as an individual and see how we can fold that into the work. So yeah, popular culture is something that fascinates me. Also, I like the playfulness of it. I like to have a sense of humor about those things. But also I really like how mainstream ideas or things that we will consider banal or everyday life, you can take it and mix it and a part of that cultural production. So I always been fascinated by film. I mean, I like films, but I really like popular films. I like blockbuster films for inspiration. Not that I like auteur and independent films, but I always say I like that as a human being. As a designer, I always been much more interested into those things. But at the same time, I've been obsessed for years with the work of somebody like Francis Bacon, and lately, in the last 4 or 5 or 6 years, I don't know, maybe, I've been obsessed, for example, with fashion, but also with butchery, about how you carve cat meat and so on. So it's not only popular culture, I'm also interested in the notion of rituals. I'm interested in notions of traditions and how that, the kind of, what I was talking earlier today about new coherences, things you can mix that they, at first glance, would not look like an obvious thing, like thinking about cows and butchery is not the first thing that you will think in relation to computers. But I like that a lot. And again, this is not, I don't think I'm very original about that. I think many other people do that. I think particularly artists do that. And I like the freedom how artists operate and fashion designers operate. Architects, we tend to be more constrained. We tend to create all these rules and limits that we should operate, and I think that's very valid. But I always be much more interested to liberate myself from those things. But again, the reference to pop culture, I mean, I think people like Greg Lynn has been doing that in his work, but also I think you have people, not only popular culture, you take somebody like painter like Gerhard Richter when he do paint over photographies, or the work of somebody like Rick Kawakobo, Conde Garzons, how she deconstructed and used things, or in more recent times, or people like Vivian Westwood with the punk, or Virgil Abloh with the streetwear and how to elevate it. But also I think people like Frank Gehry, I think I don't think he cares so much about popular culture. I think his work became part of the popular culture, but I think his obsession with art more than architecture and other things as an influence. So again, I don't think I'm very original on that, in that sense, but also something that I admire from one of my heroes, Enrique Miralles. He also was very interested in the day-by-day life and how you can blend that into it. I just found it more fun and exciting to work around those subjects. And at the end, it's also, you have to allow yourself to find the joy in things that you like and make that part of your project, and not always aspire to a hyper-theorized or super dark conceptual way or obscure conceptual way to work. Again, there's a lot of people who work in that way, which I think they're fantastic. It's just not my DNA. And I think for you, for anybody as a designer, you have to be yourself. But there are phases about that. I mean, you were mentioned the work that is in the Frac collection from 2004. That was a different kind of work. I think at that time, my work was not so influenced by popular culture, some of the things that my recent work is. That one was much more driven by software and technology and geometry and methodology. So I think it has been an evolution. Yeah, I think it has been a parallel evolution with the discourse at large. I think in the early days of Archilab and the Frac, which I think is one of the best collections in the world. I mean, the early work that Frederick Mikerud did to put that and frame it conceptually was extraordinary and incredibly important. I think he has been a major figure in framing that. And I think that there are different times, like in any other evolution of design, there are phases in the work. And I think my work went through those phases. And as I said, that earlier work that is in the collection, I think it belongs a little bit more to the category you were talking about, in terms of constraints and methodology. I think as you get older and you do it more and more, you allow yourself more freedom. But also the methodology becomes much more second nature, so it becomes less formulaic in a way.